Hey guys, it's Fanged Pipsqueak Reads, and I promised you a little bit of a surprise. As you know, I'm reading The Worm and His Kings by Hailey Piper, and I'm about halfway there. It's really, really good right now. And I wanted you guys to get a little bit of a sneak peek of how the story is. So I contacted Hailey Piper herself, and I asked her if she wanted to do a little bit of a reading of her story, and she agreed, which is amazing. And she's just gonna read a little bit of an excerpt from her book. So I'm not gonna take it any further. I'm just gonna let Hailey do her thing. See ya.
Hi, I'm Hailey Piper. I'm the author of The Worm and His Kings from Off Limits Press. It is a queer cosmic horror novella, and I'm going to be reading a little bit from the beginning. Monique Lane had promised herself she would never return to Freedom Tunnel, yet here she was 2 weeks later, promise broken. Freedom Tunnel had been a line for freight trains until it shut down in 1980, and in 1990 it remained in official disuse. No trains passed through anymore, only people, and some of them built homes here. If there were any justice in Manhattan, the tunnel would stay this way and leave all its residents be, but Monique knew better than to expect justice in this town. At a distance, it might have seemed little different from any other underground railroad. Tracks slipped inside, inviting ghost trains into premature dusk. But closer to the entrance, she hesitated, same as she had every evening when she lived here. Was there nowhere else to go? The city's alleys were unkind, but at least there she feared things that she could touch and see. Freedom Tunnel's floor was level, like much of Manhattan, and yet looking into the concrete mouth, its throat always seemed to dip toward the bowels of the earth. No one but Monique seemed to know about the empty place inside, or if others did, they never talked about it. No grown adult would out themselves as fearing a dreadful nothing in the dark. Often she hugged her empty stomach and cried outside the tunnel, owing beer bottles and scattered plastic bags. No heading inside until she was done. She never wanted the empty place to hear. No one could touch that emptiness, but noises had to travel through it. Sometimes people sang to themselves in the dark, Broadway tunes or Dolly Parton songs, and Monique would have sung along but for fear that the empty place might catch those notes in its nothingness. The same went for crying. Better not to have her misery's echoes trapped and wriggling in its web. Long-buried phantoms seemed to wander the subterranean twilight. Only when Monique's eyes adjusted did scant light reveal those phantoms to be ordinary people. Con Ed sometimes powered the lights here, sometimes didn't, though residents often pirated electricity off the main line either way. Some chose to be here, others had nowhere else. There was space to spare, and yet most, especially those who had built firm structures of wood or piled cinder blocks, chose the same place to rest every time they returned. Freedom Tunnel was home. No one had touched Monique's makeshift tent of weathered blankets fastened to rusty wall rivets. Though everyday residents likely knew she hadn't been back in several nights, they must have heard she was still out in the city, spending half of each day begging for change and the other half asking after Donna Ashton. She hadn't gone missing like Donna and a few dozen other homeless people. Freedom Tunnel had been waiting and remained unchanged. The empty place hadn't changed either. Beside Monique's tent lay a stretch of floor where no one slept. She had almost set her things there when she first arrived, but thought better of it and set up along the wall to its left instead. Some days she watched others do the same. They approached with sleeping bags, old coats, or nothing at all, looking for a place to belong in this steel and concrete neighborhood. Then, without warning, they changed their minds and found another spot in the dark. The empty place was cleaner than the rest of Freedom Tunnel, too. Not even dust would settle there. It made Monique's skin crawl and put a chill in her bones. Each time she reached out to touch that bare stretch of floor, thinking to dispel the mystique, she withdrew her hand within an inch. "You're just being silly," she would mutter to herself. But then a minute would pass, or an evening, and the empty sense of it would creep back across her mind. Sometimes a face formed in the gloom, both new and yet seen in 1,000 glances. He'd have nothing to say, but he would grin at her and start for the empty place, as if to sit beside her. Within a few steps, his expression would slacken, and he'd decide there were better places to rest. Even creeps feared the empty place. At least creeps were a tangible threat, reason for Monique to fasten belt leather around her bicep, which held the switchblade up her sleeve while she slept. No knife would threaten the empty place. She felt its nothingness in the dark some nights when the electricity faltered and kerosene lamps and burn barrels cast dancing shadows across graffiti-coated walls, and in her sleep it sent cold shapes crawling at her dreams.